Moving round to Senator Simons.
Mr. Ray, I'm glad that you are back here with us today, even though you did not provide testimony at the beginning. I think I speak for a lot of other members of this committee that we feel we were put in something of a false position, because it wasn't until Ms. Sarang's report that we were alerted to the fact that there was a possibility that this change could have a rather dramatic economic impact on people outside the Charlottetown capital region. And yet, when Ms. Nandy spoke just now, she listed off a series of economic results that were not, as Monsieur Giroux said, not dissimilar to what the parliamentary budget officer presented to the country in September, months after we did our initial review. So, Mr. Ray, I'm very curious. Did you know at the time that you spoke to us on June 16th how dramatic the economic consequences of this could be? Were you aware of the numbers that Ms. Nandy read to us this morning? And if you were aware that this could cost tens of millions of dollars to people in rural Prince Edward Island, why did you not tell us that when you spoke to us in June?
Well, thank you, Senator, for the question. So when I spoke in June, first off, the parliamentary budget officer's report came out, I think, in September. So I can confidently say I was not aware of the report that came out in September.
That was not
June.
my question. My question was, were you aware of the numbers that Ms. Nandy, the independent numbers, which are different, that Ms. Nandy presented this morning?
So the numbers that Ms. Nandy presented this morning was analysis that we had done internally. I'm not sure the timing of when we did those numbers. I can tell you that I'm aware that the unemployment at the time I testified, the unemployment rate between Charlottetown and rural PEI was a 0.01 of a percentage point. And as those numbers continually move around, of course, the financial impacts change. And so we would have updated our estimates subsequent to that. So it's a bit of a moving target, Senator, in terms of what the projections would be as the fall economic statement and et cetera updated projections on the unemployment rate. So what I can say is that we've known that this change we've been consistent in saying this, that this change would result, all things being equal, in higher qualification requirements in the rural part of Prince Edward Island compared to now, and lower qualification requirements in Charlottetown.
At the time you spoke, I have your testimony before us. You said that the rate differential was 7.3% unemployment in Charlottetown proper and 8.7% in the PEI economic region. So that's considerably more than 0.01%. I put it to you again because I feel like the integrity of this committee has been called into question. You spoke to us as a witness on June 16th. You knew that we were investigating the question of whether or not this was the correct public policy decision. Don't you think it might have been useful if you had told us the amount of money that this change would extract from PEI's economy? Because I feel that we were not given all the information that we needed to make an appropriate decision. And I appreciate that the parliamentary budget officer's work was not completed until September 7th, well after we had passed this bill in committee. But you and Ms. Nandy were here before us together in June. Why did you not tell us at that time what the economic impacts of this switch would be?
So, Senator, again, we conducted analysis. I'm not sure if the numbers that Ms. Nandy provided today were available at that time. As I said, we've looked at these numbers subsequent to the PBO projections. As I mentioned, these numbers, and as the PBO mentioned, these numbers are consistent with our internal analysis. Yeah, that's I'm afraid that's all I can say on that.
But don't you think it might have been useful, even if you didn't have these numbers, when a panel of senators asked you on June 16th, 2022, about the proposed impact of consolidating Prince Edward Island into one EI region? Do you not think it might have been pertinent when we were putting those questions to you to tell us the information that you had, even if it wasn't at this granular level, about the potential dramatic economic impact that this could have on Prince Edward Island?
So, Senator, I mean, in my testimony, I think I can go back and check, but I think I made it clear that this would result in less benefits being paid in the portion of PEI excluding Charlottetown, and potentially more benefits in Charlottetown. If particular figures weren't available at that time, I apologize. But I think I can go back and double check my testimony, but I think that was made apparent.
I have your testimony right before me, so certainly we were not given to understand that there would be anything like a $15 or $20 million loss to the province every year.
Senator Simons, you have a final question, I believe, and I have no other questions. Two, Senator Simons, followed by Senator Mockler.
So, Mr. Ray, I have the privilege of having your testimony here before me. In your opening commentary back in June, you did not express any concerns or even raise this issue. In fact, the only time it comes up that I can see in the testimony is when I'd asked you a question about the difference in unemployment rates between the two zones. And my question to you was, typically, when you see a difference that small, is it usually enough to justify two zones? And I'm going to read you back your precise answer. It is a hard question to answer, as we're really looking at common labor market conditions as well as unemployment rates. Generally speaking, a difference of a percentage point, if it's within the rates of the variable entitlement table, generally speaking, a difference of 1% will result in a differential treatment of benefits. Now, I suppose that to an economist, that might sound like you were telling us that there would be $15 million a year taken out of the PEI economy. But I do not feel that expression of concern is congruent with the numbers that Ms. Nandy read to us this morning. And as Senator Cotter put it perhaps more eloquently than I am able, I do not feel that we were allowed as senators to do our jobs properly without access to pertinent information that would have helped us to weigh the costs and the benefits of this kind of change. So I would hope that in your future testimonies before Senate committees, whether that's ours or National Finance or to whomever else you may testify, that when you are asked such questions, it would be helpful if they were answered with more detail and perhaps more frankness than we were afforded back in June.
Your question as well?
Yeah, so my question is for Mr. Giroux. And from Ms. Sarang. So we now, thanks to your excellent work, we now have made public a potential outcome of this. But of course, that is a potential outcome that assumes that no other rates or variables change in Prince Edward Island. And of course, you can only project based on the status quo. But could you, as the parliamentary budget officer, tell us, I mean, obviously as senators, we're precluded from bringing forward bills that cost the government money. but would there be apparatus that the government would have to make sure that to hypothetically create one EI zone where people's benefits went up rather than down?
Senator, I've been told early in my career that the government can deem Mondays to be Fridays. So if the government wanted to make sure that the EI regions of PEI are made as one and that nobody loses, I am convinced that it could find ways to do that. For example, taking the highest of the two EI or the two unemployment rates to assess eligibility and duration of benefits. As one of the senators around the table alluded to, the government determined that everybody was allowed to access the EI program with the minimum number of hours during the pandemic. So when you ask questions like that to the witnesses collectively, is it possible to do this and that? I think the answer in most cases, based on the questions I heard today, is yes. The government could make it so, depending on whether they want to go through legislation or regulation. It is possible to make many, many, many changes to the EI program, some of which can be easily made through regulation, others requiring legislation. But that's a long answer to say yes.